Madam Chair, we note that the Romanian side rushed to convene this meeting and immediately leveled unsubstantiated and objectively unfounded accusations against Russia. We do not believe it is a coincidence that the drone incident occurred the day after President Zelensky appealed to U.S. President Trump for missiles for American Patriot air defense systems and publicly complained that Washington was ignoring his request. We believe it is important to use this meeting to draw attention to a matter of genuine significance concerning the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Just 2 days ago, militants of the Kyiv regime used a fiber-optically guided UAV to strike the turbine building of Unit 6 at the plant.
Russia raises the specter of nuclear risk at the UN after the drone incident in a NATO member state. Putin's aide accuses Kyiv of staging a false flag during a tense showdown at the United Nations. Russia says an anti-Moscow campaign is driving the Western response as Nebenzia lashes out at the UN. Amid the Romania drone blast row, Moscow is calling for what it describes as a depoliticized investigation.
Madam Chair, we note that the Romanian side rushed to convene this meeting and immediately leveled unsubstantiated and objectively unfounded accusations against Russia. We believe that the primary purpose of today's meeting is to fulfill the request of Western countries to generate yet another anti-Russian information campaign at any cost. In this regard, we would like to present an objective account of what happened, as the details provided by the Romanian side concerning the crash of a UAV in the city of Galati raise questions from both a technical and factual standpoint. The Russian armed forces did indeed conduct operations to suppress the military infrastructure of the Kyiv regime during the night leading into May 29th. These actions are carried out in response to terrorist attacks by the Kyiv regime against Russian civilian infrastructure and are systematic and consistent in nature. As part of these operations, strikes were carried out against facilities in the port of Reni and in the Odessa region, through which our former Western partners supply military cargo for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. These supplies are unloaded there, stored, and then distributed throughout Ukraine for subsequent use in attacks against our civilian population. Naturally, we will continue to destroy such shipments at long-range logistical hubs. According to official Romanian reports, an alleged Russian Gerent-2 UAV struck the roof of an apartment building in the city of Galati. The warhead of this UAV carries approximately 50 kilograms of explosives. Had such a UAV struck the building, the damage would not have been limited to the fire shown by the Romanian media. The roof would have been completely destroyed. The distance from the port of Reni to the building in question in Galati is 19.5 kilometers. If the Ukrainian armed forces had been capable of affecting the Russian drone in the city of Reni, it would have crashed there and certainly would not have traveled such a distance without detonating in the air. All circumstances surrounding this incident should be established through a thorough, objective, and depoliticized investigation, first and foremost with the participation of the Russian side. We are prepared to take part in such an investigation, provided that objective data and drone wreckage are made available to us for examination. Only after that will we be able to assess what actually occurred. It is on the basis of verifiable facts, rather than political slogans, that any assessment of incidents of this kind should be made. We would also draw your attention to the inconsistency of statements made by Romanian officials. Initially, the incident was described as an alleged deliberate Russian strike against civilian target. Then, only a few hours later, Romanian President Nicolae revised that position, stating that one of the Russian drones had altered its course and entered Romanian airspace as a result of actions taken by Ukrainian air defense systems. At the same time, the possibility of a provocation by Kyiv, yet another attempt to test the reaction of NATO member states and accelerate their direct involvement in the Ukrainian crisis, was not even considered. Furthermore, we do not believe it is a coincidence that the drone incident occurred the day after President Zelensky appealed to U.S. President Trump for missiles for American Patriot air defense systems and publicly complained that Washington was ignoring his requests. It is regrettable that Romania provided no objective data regarding the incident to the Russian side, and instead immediately began implementing the political agenda of its senior partners. The same applies to statements made by NATO Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, which rushed to assign blame before the facts had been established. Rather than pursuing professional cooperation and a thorough investigation, pre-prepared retaliatory measures were set in motion by the Romanian side, including the closure of Russia's consulate general in Constanta. Once again, the focus shifted away from establishing the truth and toward attempt to exploit an isolated incident in order to further fuel anti-Russian hysteria. This incident is also being used by certain European countries to shield their Ukrainian protégés and to provide at least some justification for their increasingly belligerent rhetoric toward Russia. This is particularly important against the backdrop of the recent tragic events in the Lugansk People's Republic of the Russian Federation, which some would prefer to keep silent and urgently overshadow with a different news narrative. Madam Chair, just over a week ago, on May 22nd, the Kyiv regime carried out a horrific terrorist attack in Starobilsk. As a result of a strike by the Ukrainian armed forces on a teachers' college dormitory, 21 people were killed, most of them young women. More than 40 students were injured. The world learned of yet another atrocity committed by the Kyiv regime. Yet the Western political establishment, including our Western colleagues on the Security Council, chose to ignore this act of terror. Not a single word of condolence was offered. Instead, we heard only accusations of disinformation and claims that there was insufficient information. All of you were present at those meetings and should remember this well. The victims from regions whose residents are not regarded as worthy of concern by the Kyiv regime, and its Western sponsors apparently do not deserve any reaction from the West. They are dismissed as fictitious, as if they simply do not exist. Whether it was the 50 people burned alive by Ukrainian nationalists in the trade union's house in Odessa in 2014, or the 21 victims in Starobilsk, they are treated as though they never existed. At the previous meeting, we pledged to circulate materials concerning these supposedly non-existent victims, and we will do so. Yet whenever an incident occurs that can be incorporated into an anti-Russian narrative, the Western political propaganda machine is activated immediately. This well-established pattern has long become a hallmark of the European approach to Ukraine. First, accusations are leveled against Russia, and only afterward are political conclusions tailored to fit those accusations. In this regard, we believe it is important to recall the incident in Przyjaźń, Poland, in November 2022. Following the missile strike that resulted in the deaths of 2 people, the Kyiv regime and its Western backers rushed to portray the event as a Russian attack on the territory of a NATO member state. The information space was immediately flooded with speculation about a Russian strike, calls for a strong response, and even discussions of invoking NATO mechanisms. In other words, the Ukrainian authorities effectively sought to use the loss of human life to provoke a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. It later became clear that the missile in question was a Ukrainian S-300 air defense missile. This fact dramatically altered the tone of Western statements. The confidence with which accusations had initially been made disappeared almost immediately, and sensational headlines were replaced by far more cautious wording. Yet the most important thing never happened. We heard neither condemnation of the actions of the Kyiv regime nor any acknowledgement that its irresponsible statements could have brought Europe to the brink of a far more dangerous scenario. Yet none of those who automatically blamed Russia for the incident faced any political accountability for their hasty and unfounded accusations. Nor did anyone demand explanations from Kyiv. The Galati incident is far from an isolated case. Responsibility is routinely placed on Russia, yet European leaders fail to acknowledge that such incidents are predictable consequence of their own policies. Each new case of this kind is a direct result of the destructive course of arming the Kyiv regime and encouraging further escalation. Then, after some time has passed, it emerges that the latest supposed Russian trace was in fact Ukrainian. However, Western governments prefer to remain silent about such findings. No meetings of the Security Council are convened to discuss them because condemning Kyiv would mean acknowledging their own share of responsibility. We believe it is important to use this meeting to draw attention to a matter of genuine significance concerning the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Just 2 days ago, militants of the Kyiv regime used a fiber-optically guided UAV to strike the turbine building of Unit 6 at the plant. As a result of the attack, a metal section of the machine hull facade was pierced. Only by sheer luck was a reactor compartment, located approximately 10 meters from the explosion, left undamaged. IAEA inspectors who arrived at the scene confirmed that the strike on the facility had taken place. We call upon members of the Security Council to provide a principled and objective assessment of the reckless actions of the Kyiv regime, which pose the risk of catastrophic radioactive contamination affecting not only Russia and Ukraine, but also a number of European states. This is not the first instance of shelling directed at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant by the Ukrainian armed forces. One would think that this is precisely the issue that should generate the greatest concern among European states. Yet we see no emergency statements from Brussels, no urgent meetings of European leaders, and no demands directed at Kyiv to see such actions. This is another indication that EU countries, for purely political reasons, are deliberately turning a blind eye to the actions of the Zelensky regime. However, in the event of catastrophe, there will be no possibility of remaining safely on the sidelines. Radioactive contamination does not recognize state borders. Its consequences would affect the entire European continent. Particularly puzzling is the reaction of the UN Secretariat and the IAEA. They appear to be attempting to balance incompatible positions, expressing concern while merely calling on the parties to exercise restraint and avoid escalation.
I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation, who has requested it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recall that at our previous meeting, Mr. Melnik stated that the tragedy in Starobilsk was a fake, that nothing had happened there, that the incident could not be verified, and that even if people had died, they were adults. Today, I have already mentioned that we would show who those alleged adults were and what kind of fake this was. Here is a photograph of those individuals. Elena Matamayanova, 20 years old. Yes, of legal age. Anna Pogrebnichenko, 19 years old. The list goes on. Here are 21 photographs, each accompanied by a date of birth and a date of death. The cynicism with which Mr. Melnik allows himself to mock human life, and the lives of young people in particular, goes beyond all acceptable bounds.
Превосходит все границы.